the first time that I took this podium, I was able to drape the podium with a cape from my son. He was, his new favorite superhero was of his own making. He was a rainbow superhero, and his job was to help people heal. And so I was able to share and bring that spirit of youth and that spirit of future into that moment. And today I was presented with this beautiful sign from the students from U32 who wanted to make sure that we all knew that the youth are watching and they're listening and they're learning. And that's what I want for everyone, and I want that for youth from Bennington all the way up to Burlington. That they know that this work is not just about this moment, but it's about creating the world that we know we need and the world that we believe should be. So I want to thank you so much for this, and keep on fighting, youth. So I have a speech. Thank you, Kenzie, for that beautiful introduction. Thank each of you for being out here in this ridiculous cold and this outrageous weather. What a sort of unnecessary test of our dedication to this work. But we're passing with flying colors. What got me to this place of power, and what defines my movement within these power spaces, is simple. It's what I consider to be political courage. For me, political courage is the ability to push forth policy that is responsive to the people's needs, regardless of its consequence. It's the ability to drive agendas that may not be popular, but are absolutely necessary. As a woman, and especially as a woman of color, my courage must work towards the eradication of issues of race, gender inequality, class inequality, and the promotion of our human and civil rights. That courage must be centered on true social justice. I must be willing to not only speak the truths about what must change, but accept that this power is not mine to hold, and it was granted to me by the people. My political courage is shaped by our collective morals and values, and it is strengthened by your voices. It is defined by revolutionary movement politics. I often consider the tenet of movement politics and the challenges that narrative, that there must be some leader that has to save us. That the ability to destroy and dismantle systems of injustice can only happen and be executed by a particular leader. Revolutionary movement politics requires that the systems of power become egalitarian and decentralized, and that the leadership we need resides within us all. Without that structure, we become lazy and inept when our leaders are forcibly removed or disenfranchised from the process. It leaves us disappointed when those we sought to deliver us fail to deliver on the promises that they gave or that we projected onto them in our quest to find this movement messiah. I think of the election and the tenure of Barack Hussein Obama. So much hope and promise imbued in that era that was also punctuated with critical departures from the social contract that drove his campaign. I'm blessed to have been in Chicago when President Barack Obama won the election. I remember riding the subway downtown to wait for the results with nearly 250,000 other souls in the heart of the city. Beautiful black and brown people crowded the streets, adorned in head-to-toe Obama gear. The excitement and the elation as the results were announced as a moment that I'm never going to forget. And the next morning, my thoughts fell on the weight of it all, this movement that made history, the promise of so much change. And I thought, it's going to be heartbreaking for folks the first time that he disappoints them. It was an inevitability that he would be complicit in some policy or endorse some action that would result in real pain for some Americans, that might cost the lives of our military, that might result in further oppression of the poor, that normalized deportation and the destruction of our communities. Activist and scholar Angela Davis talked about the potential and the problematic aspects of seeking a deified personhood to embody the revolutionary changes that we need to build a just society. She says, quote, "The problem was that people from the Obama campaign who associated themselves with that movement did not continue to wield that collective power as pressure that might have compelled Obama to move in more progressive directions." She says that even as we're critical of Obama, what we lacked was not the right president, but a well-organized mass movement. So once again, it is not in seeking a singular savior of sorts to help guide us to the promised land, but an intricate network of courageous truth-tellers who will amplify the voices of the people to critically shape political will and redefine political courage. When I consider what the core policy entails, I try to remind folks that every political movement, from Stonewall to Standing Rock, from Adapt and Resist to the Birmingham Children's Crusade, the Brown Berets to the Black Lives Matter movement, are all fueled from the truth that the political is deeply personal, and that our laws, our policies, and our government functions are to work in service of the values, morals, and ethics of our society. For example, there should be no question in anyone's mind that individuals with disabilities should be granted an ability to move in the world unencumbered. That baseline accommodation should not be a request, but a standard. We get that? Yet it had to be reified with a national policy called the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and the ADA is constantly under attack. Yet, many of the movements that I'm engaged with do not have individuals from that community on their leadership team. Sister Davis reminds us that we have to extricate ourselves from narrow identitarian thinking if we want to encourage progressive people to embrace these struggles as their own. Whenever you conceptualize social justice struggles, you will always defeat your own purposes if you cannot imagine the people around whom you are struggling with as equal partners. Therefore, if you think of them simply as objects of the charity of others, you are constituting them as inferior in the process of trying to liberate them. So I add that without their direct participation of marginalized communities in the development of your movement has no real meaning. Or, as Lila Watson, Aboriginal elder, activist, and educator says, "If you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." The label of the second whitest state in the Union has become a crutch to keep us from doing the real work of meaningful revolutionary inclusion. This is lazy leadership of the most tepid form. In reality, the anxiety of the presence of people of color is that our opinions might challenge group dynamics and distribution of power. The truth-telling of the lived experiences of our leaders might question not only the assumptions of the movements that they're engaged in, but will likely push members of these entities to experience the discomfort of personal growth required to become truly anti-racist, meaningful allies and comrades in this work. You might just learn that you're doing it all wrong, and that perhaps you have to begin again. I urge you to take the charge that has been weaponized against marginalized peoples everywhere to endure it. The charge that demands that when we are down, we get back up again and again. So the question before us is this the best we can do? Are we complacent with enacting half measures, broken policies, and insufficient systemic changes, knowing fully the terrorism that marginalized people endure every single day? We must be willing to do so much more than we thought we are capable of doing to achieve what has not been done, but should have been done ages ago. Dr. Gerald Wing Sue, who's one of the most genius and prolific solution seekers in building an anti-racial society, reminds us, it's not about how you cover up your racial blunders, it's about how you recover. This work involves bearing careful witness to what has been revealed to each of you and will continue to be revealed to each of you today. This work involves understanding clearly that the present is ever guided by the past. This is Vermont, and we have an opportunity to show the world how it can be done. And believe me when I say that the world is watching to see what we do next. A leader of a prominent nonprofit asked for my opinion about an initiative they were launching to push for transformational change towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. They shared their elation at the readiness to change amongst their colleagues about work that was already underway. Once again, my eyes darkened and the words fell from my weary heart. How many people of color are actually involved in this process? Of the nearly 24 minds driving this conversation, there was only one person in the room who would actually be impacted by their inadequate attempts. Despite all heeding, the group barreled on ahead on an unnecessary timeline that would not prove or provide the room necessary to seek the review from the very people that they were purporting to support. You can likely guess the overarching reasons that this group would choose to omit these voices. It's mostly process-oriented, mostly fear-based, and that they did not want to learn that they might be mistaken in their assumptions. But largely, it's the need to find a quick resolution to the feelings of guilt and hurt that makes those in power move too quickly and ineffectively to relieve their perceived pain. These half-hearted results cannot provide the necessary healing for those who need it the most. So here we are each day, fighting to reaffirm our place in this new world order, each moment trying to muster the strength to fight another day, to find the words that feel just out of reach, that will heal our collective wounds, to be present for our children, to pick up on the vibrations of their hearts and shield them from the generational trauma that haunts our bloodlines. We find ourselves crumbling from failing health, severe mental distress, depression, and anxiety. We watch the dollars and cents that are doled out to us in trickles and tips slip through our fingers into the chasm of this capitalistic life. And yet, here we are in this place, showing up like we always do.
That's right.
Standing here, against all odds, against all elements, in the center of our heartbreak and irrepressible hope, committing ourselves to the work ahead, committing ourselves to the communities we live in, committing ourselves to the state that we call home, committing to contribute our gifts, our labor, our lives to this deeply flawed nation. A friend, activist, and warrior put it aptly when I asked her how she was holding up against the odds, and she cautioned, "Kiah, my bones are tired." Yet, here she remains. And a priest once told me that when you consider it in totality, marginalized peoples are the real Vermonters. We recommit to this state again and again. Our love is so great, our hope is so real, that we determine that this state is worth fighting for. But we cannot do it alone, and we shall not be exploited for our pain. So I ask you to consider, what is your real equity analysis for the work you're trying to do? Are you really ready to cede power in the places that you hold to bring voices to light that have been ignored? Have you considered the ways in which your systems, standards, and processes reify inequity and exclusivity? Must we always prove ourselves worthy of inclusion in the spaces that are our frigging birthright as sisters? It's time to do the work. It's time to dive in. It's time to commit to changing this world for good. Let's get to work. Thank you. When I consider what the core policy entails, I try to remind folks that every political movement, from Stonewall to Standing Rock, from Adapt and Resist to the Birmingham Children's Crusade, the Brown Berets to the Black Lives Matter movement, are all fueled from the truth that the political is deeply personal, and that our laws, our policies, and our government functions are to work in service of the values, morals, and ethics of our society.